Welcome to Expect More Arizona's first in a series of presentations about our Vote for Education campaign. My name is Donna Davis, and I am the Senior Community Engagement Manager for Expect More Arizona. We bring diverse groups of people together to find and implement solutions to Arizona's most pressing education issues. We are a statewide organization focused on advocacy. For 10 years now, we have had a Vote for Education campaign. I'm going to try and share my screen here. Okay, wait a second. Our Vote for Education campaign includes 4 actions that you can see here: sign up, study up, speak up, and show up. On our website, under Study Up, you will see information about bonds and overrides. Included in here is a piece of collateral that we have about what bonds and overrides are, but we also have a list of the 2020 bond and override measures across the state. So you can go in here and see a list of this year's bond and override measures across the state. We also have in here a list of all the school board candidates across the state. When you click on the county, the list of school board candidates will come up. Since the 1980s, Arizona has had equalization funding, and all schools receive the same amount of money per student based on student characteristics, like whether they are in elementary school or in high school, whether they're English language learners, special needs, etc. Bonds and overrides allow districts to fund things that they can't fund with their share of state funding. More pay for teachers, specials, all-day kindergarten, better facilities, etc. The important thing to know about bonds and overrides are that they tax local school district citizens and provide funding for local schools. The other thing you need to know is that many times they lose by very small margins, which means losses of significant funds for local schools. So it will be vitally important for all of us to vote all the way down the ballot to include the back of the ballot. I volunteered to organize this webinar because in my off work time, I try to help with my local elections. And as I travel the state, I hear about the impacts of these elections on districts. There's going to be 4 sections to this webinar, and we're going to show one section at a time. So please feel free to enter any questions in the Q&A section of the webinar. I'm not sure we'll have time to answer all the questions, but we will try to respond to your questions afterwards. So tonight, we're going to start with the beginning of the bond and override process. Dr. Hightower is the superintendent of Tolleson Elementary District, and Terry Locke is the director of community relations for the Chandler Unified School District. My questions for them were, how do they determine that a bond and override is needed, and who is involved in the process? So we're going to start today with Dr. Hightower. Thank you for being here, Dr. Hightower.
Thank you so much, Donna, for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to also share my screen with you. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes.
Thank you so much. So every school district has governing board members in their school district. Most school districts are comprised of 5 governing board members. Some have 7 and some have 3, but the vast majority of school districts have 5. Every school district is guided by their mission and their vision statement and their goals. And of course, for us, there's a huge emphasis on that 3-letter word, ALL, or all. And the vision, of course, we want to expect excellence, inspire innovation to achieve greatness. Every school district also has goals. For us, we have these 3 main goals that really guide all decisions by our governing board and administration. Number 1 is a school district. Of course, we want to increase student achievement. That's the main goal. Number 2, our board was huge on this governing board goal. and district goal was that, yes, we do want to have A-rated schools, but we must not forget about the whole child. And there's a lot of implications to bring the best education that focuses on the whole child, and then provide outstanding customer service, always starting with our students, first and foremost, our teachers, our community, and our staff as well. When making decisions, our governing board also looks at our demographics. And one area that I highlighted in these demographics is that 85% free and reduced lunch. This has high implications when any team brings in front of a governing board a decision to call for a resolution of a bond or override. So our board members are always thinking of that. We have close to 9 out of 10 students that receive their lunch through the National School Lunch Program, either free or reduced. It's a lot of verbiage here, so I won't bore you too much with all the verbiage of how much does a school district receive for maintenance and operations. But something that it is very critical for me to share with you is that typically about 85 to 87% of the maintenance and operations budget goes to salaries and benefits. So the vast majority of our maintenance and operations budget goes to pay for these salaries and these benefits. District additional assistance, it used to be called capital, and for override purposes, the capital override or district additional assistance override. In the recession, we had 10 years of 87% cuts, and that was pretty rough. So to give you an example, for a school district my size or our size, we were supposed to be receiving about $1.7 million a year, but instead we were receiving about $160,000 a year. Keep in mind that these capital funds or district additional funds were supposed to purchase textbooks or digital textbooks, maintain buildings, and pay for software. So software costs alone were about $250,000 for a district my size. So that $160,000 was not being able to cover all the expenses that we had in those lines. So these are huge questions. See, we have these 3 main goals in our school district. How do we align the budget to the goals? What do these goals mean to positions, programs, opportunities to the budget, and our budget overrides and bonds needed? So in order to answer those questions, we always bring a needs assessment process into our school district. And we ask a broad group of stakeholders, teachers, staff, families, parents, community members to participate in these needs assessment committee meetings. And the focus of the meetings are to determine what are the needs of the schools, and of course, keeping in mind the mission, vision, and goals that I was just talking to you about. We hold multiple meetings, and this is a critical process that I need to share with you. We hold multiple meetings. So to give you an example, when we felt that there was a need to have a bond election, we contracted a general contractor to conduct a capital needs assessment of all of our school facilities. And we asked the general contractor to be completely independent. So once this general contractor determined what were the needs and the different maintenance needs of our school district, if the bond was successful, they could not bid for the projects or anything like that. We wanted it to be completely independent, and they agreed to that. So when they finished this process of this capital needs assessment, the needs were for all of our schools and our operations department, there were $27 million in need. So we had $27 million in deferred maintenance, and unfortunately, our bonding capacity was $24 million. So
no.
that was pretty rough to hear. So immediately we color coded. We asked this same contractor to color code our needs assessment. What must happen now? What can wait? And what can wait a little bit longer, because we already know that we won't have enough money to fix everything that needs to be fixed. The other thing that we did was conduct a demographic study to figure out how many students are staying in our district, how many are using other choice schools, how many developers are coming into our area. Are we going to have growth? Are we going to need to expand our schools? So that was also going to be part of that bond. And then what's going to be the tax rate implication to our community? So these are questions that we really needed to have answered for our governing board before presenting this information to them. So then the committee, same committee, comes up with a consensus to make a recommendation to the governing board. And then the governing board decides whether it's going to be a bond, a maintenance and operations override, a capital or district additional assistance override. Sometimes you only have one at a time as a school district. Sometimes there are districts that have to have two at a time. And sometimes there have been school districts that have had the three measures on one ballot because the needs were so high in many different areas. So then the governing board decides. It's not an easy decision for a governing board to make. As I stated, when you have 9 out of 10 students in your school district that qualify for the National School Lunch Program, our governing board members worry about that. Our governing board members are diverse, they're elected, they're unpaid, they know their community. In my case, one of the governing board members worked as a community service manager, another one is a city building official, another one is a school principal in a nearby school district, another one in the healthcare industry and owns her own business, and the other one in bank fraud prevention. So they know our community and they worry, but ultimately they see the presentation by this needs assessment committee and realize it is critical to bring these funds to the school district in order to meet those goals that we have for our schools. So then this committee develops a common presentation that they can share factually with many stakeholders and many different groups. All this is done outside of school hours, not using school resources. And this needs assessment committee becomes the political action committee many times. And many times the PAC hires a consultant to ensure all steps are followed appropriately. There are many steps that need to be met, and you want to make sure that that's followed. In our case, we work with Ulan from Primary Consulting, and he's going to also be speaking at this webinar. Elections in the last 4 years in our school district, we have had 3 different elections. And maintenance and operations, you see what's up on the screen right now. But what you don't see is that this maintenance and operations override for us funds for the kindergarten, art teachers, technology teachers, band teachers, including mariachi, marching band, counselors, social worker, athletics, alternative education. So there's huge implications. If this maintenance and operations override doesn't pass, we know exactly where the cuts will go. So it's something that now it's not a luxury, it's just to make the education of our students whole and more robust than what we would be able to do given the funding that we have in our state. And then the bond, as I mentioned before, it has been a blessing to have it. We were able to expand 2 schools where we saw a lot of development coming in, and we have been renovating a lot of the facilities. Thankfully, that 87% cut that we had for 10 years has been, it's being restored. I think we're in the last year of restoring that fund, and that's been a blessing. And then the capital district additional assistance override, it has been used to fund technology for every single one of our kids. And also, in addition to the technology, it has also been able to fund the reading adoption and the math adoption as well. Something critical to share is that we do have reporting accountability. So every year by October, school districts must report in a public meeting of the governing board how the funds for overrides and bonds are spent. And I know that my colleague Terry Locke from Chandler Unified School District will be sharing more specifics on the Political Action Committee and the work that their district does. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hightower. Well, she did a really nice job of a big picture view. I'm going to get into the trenches a little bit if I can. That's kind of what I do in Chandler Unified. So our process, and when we know we're going to coming up on a bond election, the timeline's more than a year out. So about a year or so out, all of our heads of divisions look and say, look, we're going to need 2 new elementary schools or 1 elementary school, 1 high school. We're going to have to replace the roofs on 6 different buildings in the next 5 or 10 years. this number of renovations, number of buses we're going to need, and so forth. Then we take it through what's called our Citizens Budget Committee, very similar to what Lupita has, and very important. It's open to anybody. In fact, if we see somebody saying something negative about them, we reel them in. We want to educate them by having them be on our budget committee. So we go through that whole process. And then in addition to that, now Joel Worth was our CFO for many years, and he managed that extremely well for all those years. And then Lana Berry is our current CFO, and she also continues with a citizens committee, but she's also added a road show now. So we take our show on the road and we introduce the information at a Friday public policy meeting at the Chambers of Commerce, at real estate groups, Rotaries, my Rotary, whatever the case might be. So we get that a little bit more broad feedback than we used to get it. So that group comes back, they take all of our suggestions, including me needing a new computer, and we run that all up, and it's a big bill, and it's probably not very sensitive to the tax rate. So we take that, we have the Citizens Budget Committee help us prioritize some of what you saw in Tolleson, and then make it's going to be manageable. And then the key is going to be to figure out what's sellable. So do you have something for everybody in a bond election? Are there things for growing schools? Are there things in the existing neighborhoods to say, poor me, because you're building new schools, what about us? Well, it's important that we have a equity in terms of technology and really everything, including some facilities. So you've got to have that buy-in from all of your voters, if you will. So when we get that together, then the chair of the Citizens Budget Committee, which is typically a parent, it can just be a community member, makes that presentation to the governing board and says, Chandler Unified, you need to have this bond election. Here's why. We have these kinds of priorities for our community. It's important to us to have these great schools, great facilities, they're hubs of our communities, and so forth. So we have an outside group telling the governing board, you need to have a bond election. So that's where the proposal goes from there. With an override election, honestly, it's every 4 years, because after 5 years, you have to start phasing out 1/3 at a time. And we figure, we don't say it publicly, but we have one to lose with 4 years. So we're now in the cycle of overrides. In fact, all of our financial elections right now are on odd number years. So our override was in 15. We had a bond election an override in 13, a bond election in 15, an override renewal in 17, and a $290 million bond election in 2019. So the lesson we learned from the 2012 election, when they had the petty sales tax trying to get re-upped, and the governor bailed off of that as well. Remember, there was all this out-of-state money came in and just basically trashed public education. And so not only did that renewal fail, but so did overrides and bonds for districts that had never lost a financial election in their history. People like Tempe, a university town. I'm not sure about Linda Jeffries. She can speak to that later in Alhambra. I don't recall. But districts you just knew they were going to pass. There's no question about it. They failed. So we said that since we've got to plan these at least a year in advance, we really need to try to focus on odd numbered years, and then have it's not going to help you in 2020, but have a all-mail ballot, because it's a whole different strategy when you run the election in October. So that's our cycle right now. So every other year, the override's pretty much in place unless we get an influx of money from the state to correct some of the former money. That's a big deal. The other thing that's important is whether it's an override or a bond election, really more than a year in advance, you need to do some of the planning and recruit 2 people. One is going to be your PAC chairperson. That needs to be somebody that's on our panel later today that can rally a broad base of group of people, not somebody who's going to be polarizing because they've got their things and they care about kids and whatever else, but they can't attract others to work hard on behalf of this PAC, if you will. And the other one's the treasurer. So those are the 2 positions you have to get in place first. The treasurer is going to keep you out of jail. It's going to basically make sure you're following all the guidelines and reporting to the county and handling money properly. So before we go too far along the line, those are the first things we do. And then I'll start working on what other kinds of talent, if you will, do we need on that PAC. So we identify people who are going to be good writers, for example. We get the people that just want to do the work. These are typically fathers, not always, but typically fathers say, you tell me where to go pick up the great big signs. I'll load up 12 of those and I'll take this section. And those are all extremely important people. And you've got people who are going to communicate with your vendors and businesses to ask for donations on behalf of the PAC. But it all starts with the chairperson and the treasurer, and then everything else kind of falls into line. And then your working on your communication very, very early, because you're going to need it coming forward, but you're also starting to get some idea from the public. So for example, the people I want to help write are going to do hopefully do all the letters to the editor, which are the pro statements first, which have to be submitted to the county then. Those then become your letters to the editor. You've already done with these. Unless you find issues that you weren't expecting, you got to address that, because you're getting a lot of concerns from the public about something, then you'd create more. So the idea is by June, we've turned in about 20 pro statements and slash letters to the editor. That's all in place, and you've got that. And you write those so that they're written so that they can also be a letter to the editor. There's still such a thing as a letter to the editor, believe it or not. It's not everything is online today, but that's still, that exists, especially for our Sun Lakes group. We have a very large Sun Lakes presence, and those folks do read the hard copy newspaper. So you get those things in place, and then again, when you do that, get that endorsement from somebody in May or June, you also write it to say this can be used for a letter to the editor. You get everything in place to do everything and submit that. So those are some of the key things in place. We meet at Chompy's. It's a restaurant in Chandler that has it's just perfect because it has a back room, and they have no problems with individual checks, which is the big deal with when you get 10, 12, 15 people in a room. And we're obviously off campus at all time. We don't use any district resources as the PAC. I'm a representative from the district. I'm doing this on my own time on Monday nights at 6 o'clock at Chompy's during the election season. And then we follow up with some of our reporting, not only what we have to do in terms of reporting the state, we also follow up with our annual report. We do a State of the Union, a State of the District in January of every year, and includes hopefully it's a fun video we do, but has a lot of facts in it. And then a hard copy, 8-page annual report that always includes a page, update on where the bonds are, where your money is being spent, and those kinds of things. So that's kind of the trenches view from my perspective.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you, Dr. Hightower. So you guys can mute and turn off your videos, and we're going to go to hear about PACs, political action committees. And my goal with this segment of the meeting was to involve a large district, a medium district, and a small district. So today we have Karen Treon and Cindy Bitcon, who are from Scottsdale's Yes to Children Committee. Nicky Indicavitch was supposed to be here from Humboldt School District, but just before this meeting started, unfortunately, Nicky had an emergency, and so she is unable to be with us this afternoon. Aga Cook is from the Yes Mohave Valley Schools Now campaign in Mohave Valley, Arizona, which is extremely rural. And they have done they're starting to do their second attempt at an override. And so I wanted them to talk to you about the political action committees and what people do on them, and you know, any tips that they can give to any of you out there. So Cindy and Karen, let's start with you.
Hi, thank you. I'm Karen, and I think Cindy is right there too, right, Cindy?
Mm-hmm. Right here.
So we together, we chaired the Scottsdale Unified Yes to Children Committee in 2014 and 2016. So we're going to sort of take turns going through our perspective from a larger urban district. Mr. Locke gave the great lead in, though. His story is, I mean, that story of 2012 was a story of all of us, right? And we had that same experience of losing an override in 2012, which was pretty devastating. We ran it again in 2013 and lost it again. And I say we, Cindy and I were definitely involved in that. That was before we were chairing it. And I don't say that, you'll see why I'm saying that in a moment. It was definitely before Paul Ulan was involved in our campaign. So we had 2 losses in 2012, 2013. And we were feeling it in our schools. We went to early release days on Wednesday every week. Specials were cut in half in all of our elementary schools. Our class sizes were very large. My oldest daughter was a middle schooler then, and 42 kids in her class was typical. Everybody was feeling it. And so we knew we needed to kind of reinvent how we were doing things. And then around came 2014. At that point, and I don't want to steal their thunder, but I think I loved what Mr. Locke and Dr. Hightower said, and then what what you're going to hear later about fundraising and about the consultants and how we work together, because this is kind of just a really a process that really should work in a pretty coordinated way as much as you can legally. But because Dr. Hightower laid out how the districts make the decisions, Mr. Locke talked about how this gets handed off to the boots on the ground, so to speak. So we just reinvented ourselves in 2014 with Paul's guidance, and you'll meet Paul later, and really became much more. We realized this was not just about rallying the troops. It wasn't just about going to PTOs and getting parents to vote yes for us. Our numbers, we understood our numbers much better from then on, and we treated this in a very data-oriented way, where we were looking for, we pulled public records requests for our parents in our district. We cross-matched that to lists we had of registered voters. We figured out the percentage of registered voters that parents made up. We figured out, and then we figured out how many people we needed to be getting beyond our parent voters. Our parent voters are about 15% of our voters. So we needed to get way beyond our parents. And we switched gears on this with Paul's guidance and information, and became much more focused on going after those yes votes. So I would say that was our turning point. It did work. We did win in 2014 and then ran a bond in 16. But what as we were doing that and trying to stay so focused on the numbers, we did a lot of what Mr. Locke was referring to and tried to assemble kind of that community support. And I think Cindy's going to talk a little bit more about that in our steering committee and how we brought in the community for that kind of support. Cindy, do you want to talk about that?
Yep, thanks, Karen. we had two groups. We had a small group that met frequently, and we had a larger steering committee that had people on it that did not have children in our schools. They were community members. We went to our local Scottsdale government, and we had a very involved councilwoman as our honorary chair. She brought so much insight. We had someone else in our small group who also did not have children in our school. It helps to hear what the community thinks, because oftentimes if you don't have a child in the schools, you really don't understand. And if an override fails and you see it on the ballot the next year, people think they don't know that it failed the year before. They think you're coming back for it again. So we quickly learned that we needed to educate the larger community. Our parents understood it all because they were living in it. But if you didn't have children in schools, you don't know the state of education in Arizona. And so we broadened it. We also did a poll, and we found that property values were what people cared about. And so we pushed that message, and everything we did, that was our message. We tried to get talking engagements to groups, go to senior centers, or what else did we do, Karen?
Realtor groups and
yes.
Civic organizations in Scottsdale.
Yep. We just realized we had to broaden our reach. And as far as fundraising, that's challenging, because Karen, do you want to go on that? That's one of your favorite topics.
It is. And I know you're going to talk about this below, but I think this is it's such an important issue, because it's really hard to raise money for these campaigns. I mean, we were fortunate. We were able to raise about Paul will probably correct me with his photographic memory if I'm wrong, but I think we ran at about $150,000 budget, maybe just shy of that, 140 for the override. And that was hard to get that much money. And we know, that's a luxury. And and that money largely does not come from parents. I think we've probably all faced the struggle of realizing parents just feel disconnected from this somehow. And it's hard to get parents to understand that we need their contributions and support for this effort. So it's a struggle, and it also really displays the inequities. I mean, we have, it lays bare the inequities between how much kind of commercial property or what kind of property is in a given district, or rural versus the demographics of rural versus urban areas. But that fundraising it's really unfair. And I think personally, I believe we have to fix this problem, but it's vital, because the only way we're getting the word out to the voters that we need their yes vote. The only way we succeeded was being able to run mail campaigns, and we pushed out about 3 pieces of mail. Mail is very expensive, as you all know, but so fundraising was tough. I mean, but we were supported by businesses in our community, and we just kept asking and asking and asking. But the inequities of that are just sort of shocking to me. We also had, Cindy mentioned the voter fatigue that you face of people feeling like you keep coming back asking for more, because it's a hard process system to understand. So those things are challenging. And the one thing I would mention that I think we saw on the forefront, and I think it's coming, we're seeing it more, is, excuse me one moment, I'm sorry. I think we're seeing a shift that we can take some of that off of mail and put it into as more of a social media campaign. And I think that's at least promising regarding fundraising, because it's so expensive.
Without a doubt, that is the new way to advertise. Mail is so expensive, and Facebook it is an effective tool to reach voters, and it is much less expensive than printing lit and mailing it to all of your voters. It is a great tool. It's difficult. It is, I think it's very helpful to have other people on your steering committee that, Donna, just as you said, you join PACs, and it really is it's helpful, because it's hard to get people outside of the parent community involved in the campaign. So yeah, I think, did we cover everything, Donna, for you?
Yes, I think you did. And now I think, Aga, if we can invite you back in, I think perhaps between the 4 of us, we can talk a little bit about what Nicky was going to say when we met the other day. I kind of told the group before we started that if I had more sense when I was planning this thing, I probably would have called it bonds and overrides during the COVID-19 pandemic, because it certainly, according to both Cindy, Karen, and Aga and Nicky, it has certainly changed the way that campaigns have to run these days. I know that as far as fundraising is concerned, Nicky did a Facebook post that highlighted how much money they could bring into their PAC if every parent gave $20. And that was one of her strategies. But Cindy, what else did you hear that Nicky talked to us about?
Well, Nicky was interesting. She also is facing a failure, right? And so she's facing the same thing. Not only are the voters fatigued, but your volunteers are fatigued as well. And your donors aren't interested in giving more money. They gave it before, they gave it last year, and you weren't successful. And she's struggling. It's difficult to reach voters and to raise money, and especially when you've had a loss. And I know Karen and I felt we had the weight of the world on our back in 2014, because our children in our classrooms were feeling the cuts. And it was a lot, and it shouldn't come down to volunteers running an incredible $150,000 campaign to get critical funding for our children. It's not a good way to fund education, and it's very unfair.
If I could add one thing, for those that might be listening to this that are thinking about running a PAC or starting a PAC. When I was listening to Mr. Locke talk, I was envious of the model that you have developed in your district. And it's not one that we've necessarily had the luxury of working with. We worked with previous administrations in our district, but he definitely demonstrated a very kind of long-term view. And the benefits of that are like ongoing education of the parent community, ongoing engagement and involvement, keeping people updated, and also understanding the points of transfer, where I think the more a district can do like as Dr. Hightower laid out too, of laying the groundwork for why we're doing something and while they're doing the factual basis for it. They can't advocate for it, of course, but while they're doing the work to prepare for it, that laying the groundwork helps us once we get the handoff to us, to the non-district people that start the advocacy work. And I think it's just that the examples that they both gave as district leaders really showed kind of an ideal system, I think. So I think that I would encourage you to follow that model. And even if your district is new to this or you're new to it, to look at that model and realize that that's something your district can probably recreate with the cooperation of your district leadership. Because I commend them for how they explain they do it. And like I said, I was a little bit envious.
I had the same thought, Karen. So
Yeah, sure.
I understand.
Aga, how much is your campaign? How much does your campaign cost?
Well, I think our district is much smaller, so our amounts will be smaller. I would say roughly about 12,000. That would probably be about that. Now, we are, like I said, should I start?
Yeah, sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. So I'll start with a little picture of our area, so we have a better understanding. So I represent schools now. This is budget override configuration for Mohave Valley Elementary School District. Our school district is small. We have 3 schools. We serve 1,100 students. All schools are Title I schools, and also about 70% of our students are students who are eligible for free and reduced price lunches and breakfast. So this area is definitely challenging in terms of different needs and so forth. So our goal is right now we are asking our voters to reauthorize a budget override that was approved in 2016. And just going back before 2016, we had great challenges in terms of staff shortage. So we would have several classrooms with long-term substitute teachers that were employed. And we had in the middle of the school year, we had teachers leaving, and we had to combine classes, and then end result was that we had undesired number of students in classrooms. So that was one of the greatest challenges. Now, since 2016, we are very fortunate because the situation definitely changed. We start every school year after 2016, we start fully staffed. We have highly qualified teachers, teachers who are familiar with the district. They stay longer. They're committed to the community, and they know our students, because our students, our families, they have some social and economical challenges. So this is where we are. And so right now our goal is we have our goal for this election, and the same pertains to maintaining teacher salaries. So I will start maybe with our PAC. So who serves on our PAC? We select PAC members based on volunteers. So we have a couple of teachers, couple school administrators that serve on a PAC. If we have any parents, strict parents, I say they are helping PTO, they're helping with different components of the campaign, and not directly a part of the PAC, but their support, they show their support, their help with different things. Other than that, I'm thinking the next will be a budget. And like all of you had mentioned before, a budget is one of the greatest challenges, especially in our area. So when we started our campaign, we just didn't have any funds. So we simply addressed our staff for donations towards the campaign. We kind of agreed upon certain amount, and if you can do it, that would be great. We were pleasantly surprised. Almost everyone contributed, and we ended up having almost $5,000. So that was great, and that allowed us to cover some initial expenses for the campaign. But other than that, we, in addition to budget, our PAC work on crafting, work throughout this campaign, work on crafting strategies that best address our area, as well as the time, because time is quite challenging. I think pandemic impacted the way we have to plan our campaign. And so in terms of budget, in addition to the funds that we collected from our teachers, administrators, it was really challenging to reach out to the community because of the hardship they experienced. We had closure of small businesses, larger businesses in the areas that we have, and so it is really difficult to ask for extra funds. We were fortunate to have one local business to support our campaign, and then a couple other businesses from outside of our area, which made this campaign a little. We have now we are in a position that we can pay for some more activities that we were planning. So in terms of crafting campaign strategies, like I said, we had to evaluate during this pandemic time what works, what doesn't work anymore. And just an example, canvassing, it is according to the research, it's a great way to address voters. Now, it is a great concern, health concern during this time. Social media, great strategy. So we are addressing social media. We have our website. Also text message banking. So we are aware that these strategies work better during this time. Other than that, we are planning to send mailers. They are indeed expensive, and then we have some questions whether they will be effective or not, just because we have lots of other mailers during a presidential campaign. So also as a team, we try to reach out to the community, as some of you mentioned, pro statements, public appearances by our community, by our PAC members, and talking and communicating on providing information to what override means to our district, because I think the most important component is giving proper information, because I think many community members, they don't understand how it works and what kind of benefits we can gain from it. So I think information is one thing, and persuasion another, and that information component is very important. So aside from challenges, I just feel that this is a great, the budget override is a great gain for our area based on our experience, based on we see at our district, and so I think I think this is a great thing for the community. Just going back to before 2016, and now we are able to retain highly qualified teachers, and we are able to meet the needs of our students and their families.
Thank you, Aga. That was great information. And I know for a fact that your previous superintendent who recently retired told me himself that the very first override did a great deal, brought a lot of benefit to the school districts. So, so that just goes to show how much, you know, these bonds and overrides can impact a district. I do have a couple of questions from a couple of my coworkers actually, who asked me, how do you have any effective ways to engage parents in your campaigns?
In our campaign, I have to say that because of school closure, this is one of other challenges. Now, school closure is one thing, so we are not able to communicate so much with the parents. I mean, we do communicate, but also I think the school closure put a little bit different light and perspective on schools in the eyes of the parents, I think, because now some of the responsibilities with teaching, with maintaining or keeping students on track shifted to the parents. So that was very sensitive area for us to ask parents to contribute, to be more involved in the campaign. But like I said, our PTO is very supportive, and we are we appreciate their efforts to contribute to our campaign.
Great. Cindy, do you have any comment on that?
Well, we ran our campaigns not during a pandemic.
That's
so
true.
we did have a lot of parent involvement. We did do canvassing. We did big walks. We have 5 high schools in our district and complexes that feed up into that high school. And so we did a walk every weekend leading up to the election in each complex. And so all of the schools in that complex would go. We had big walks. That is very helpful. But of course, this year I'm working on another campaign and we're doing no knock. So we're just putting literature on the door and walking away. But we really tried to incorporate our parents. They were our foot soldiers. We could not have done it without them. They worked in their communities. They held signs. Hi, Karen, do you have something to add? Parents?
No, keep going.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So we were in a completely different situation. So we did utilize our parents a lot with phone banking and signs, and we of course would utilize the back to school nights. That was very helpful. We could get parents then. We would have to rent space from the district, but that was really helpful. And of course we didn't have those this year either. So I imagine that would have really hurt us, because that is where we got a lot of our parents. Was we ran around to back to school nights and spoke, or had someone speak at every back to school night about what was coming. We rented space, so I think we could advocate, but those are your foot soldiers. So you have to get parents engaged because they'll spread the word.
Who was it that said that their election lost by 267 votes? Was that?
That was us.
Oh my
Yeah, in
gosh.
13. That was
Out of how many voters?
Paul, I think it was, sorry, I'm trying to, Karen, do you remember? I think our number was 50,000. I think we needed 50,000 yes votes. And 15% of that was made up of parents or staff in the district. We had to go to the community for the rest of it. And I think it was 50,000. But I can't remember for sure. Paul will definitely know. That man knows every number of everything. So yeah, parents are important.
And I know, for some of the districts out here on the west side, I participated in a campaign for one of our districts out here in the Southwest Valley. And initially when the numbers came out on election night, we had lost by 4 votes.
Oh.
And I was devastated and thinking to myself, if I had knocked on 5 more doors, this would have won. But as it turned out, once they got all the counting done, we did end up winning the override. But it's heartbreaking. And I know so many districts that have lost by 4 to 10 votes in this state. And that's why voting is critical, and voting your entire
Yes.
ballot is critical. And Dr. Hightower is the one who reminded me that you have to turn your ballot over and vote on the back side of the ballot as well, because some people just vote on the front side and don't bother to turn it over. Karen put in the chat that that you tried to make sure you had an override ambassador at every school to help spread the word and distribute signs and magnets. And so you asked the PTOs to help us find to help you guys find those ambassadors.
Right.
And we had another question about ways that people who are not participating in the PAC, ways that just community people could help. Would it be by donating? Would it be by?
There's lots of things. There's
Okay.
lots of things. Community members could make phone calls. They could do postcards. I know there's lots of people doing written postcards this campaign because it's really the only way you can touch voters personally. That's helpful to have community members do that. They certainly could sit on a steering committee. It would be fantastic if you could bring someone in to distribute your signs or be your sign person that's not a parent, and they're engaging with people daily and talking about what they're doing and how they're volunteering. Aga, do you have, I'm sure your situation is completely different.
I just wanted to share a great strategy. We have great hopes, and we appreciate our volunteers. So what we did, we scheduled for the month of October every Saturday a sign holding campaign. So we have different central locations throughout our community, and we have a sign-up sheet, and we will have whether teachers, staff members, or community members, they're welcome. It's posted on our website. They can help us to spread the word, and that should help us with reaching out to the community. As during pandemic time, we cannot attend any group meetings and spread the word, share information. So this would be a great way to involve or spread the word to our voters.
Another question I got was, have either of you had the opportunity to talk to someone and change their mind about voting for your bond or override, and how did that go? Cindy, you're shaking your head.
Many times, many times. I was surprised as we went out to the community at the misinformation that's out there. And really a lot, at least in my experience, a lot of people I encountered didn't grow up here. And so I grew up in Denver. So I know the Cherry Creek School District in Denver, Colorado. It's very different than Arizona. Arizona funds education differently than most states. And so in Colorado, you would need an override for something over and above what the state paid for. In Arizona, you need an override to pay your salaries. And so it's different. So when I was out in the community talking to people, that's also when I realized that people who don't have kids in the district thought we won the year before, and why were we at it again, and why were we at it the third year? And that was something I would never have thought of had I not. And that person voted yes on our override that year because she had no idea that it had failed. And so she just felt like we were greedy and coming after him every year for money, and she had no idea. When people find out how education is funded in Arizona and how grossly underfunded it is, it's not very hard to get them to vote yes for that. It's pennies on the dollar. It is very little to the homeowner, to the property owner. So we changed minds every day because people just simply did not understand what we were asking for. So yes, I did. And I've spent the last 15 years trying to educate people about our education system because it isn't ideal and it needs to be addressed. And I'm no different today with my kids graduating from high school than I was when they started kindergarten. So,
Aga, do you have anything to add to that?
I think one thing I want to say, I am not as long as Karen and Cindy here working with overrides, but based on my observation, it mostly we don't get support because there's not enough information in the community. So like in our area, there's not much opposition that we see. That's maybe lack of information, and that's something that we need to address during our campaign.
Thank you, Cindy and Aga. And now we're going to move to Linda Jeffries, who was the, okay, let me see here. Linda Jeffries was the treasurer for the Alhambra Citizens for Effective Schools, and she's going to talk about the treasurer's role in this process. And she is joined by Taylor Perkins. There's Taylor. Taylor, you can turn your video on now. And Taylor is with Chase Building Team, and they generously provide funding and support to many of these efforts around the state. And I've asked Taylor, Linda's going to talk about the treasurer side of the house. Taylor's going to talk about the fundraising side of the house. So Linda, you're on.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be with you this afternoon to share a little bit of information about the role of a treasurer in regards to a PAC. And so the role of a treasurer is to keep accurate and detailed accounting records of the contributions that are received by the PAC as well as the expenditures. And also to comply with your county's requirement for completing what's called campaign finance reports. So it's a critical position. This role takes a very detailed person just because there's so much to keep track of in terms of what we have to report. So when your PACs, your political action committees are formed, they must file a statement of organization with your county elections department. And when that happens, that kind of triggers this role of the importance of the treasurer and how the county then communicates with your PAC treasurer in terms of the reporting that's required for each county. So once you form your PAC, you will also need to get a bank account at one of your local banks. I would highly recommend that you have at least 2 people who are signers on that account for a couple of reasons. Number one, is going to protect you as an individual. You are a community member. You are taking in a lot of contributions and you're also writing checks. So number one, you want to be sure that you protect yourself as an individual. Number two, if anything ever happens to you, then there are 2 people who are watching or having the direct oversight over the account. So it's always just good practice to have at least 2 signers on the account. As well as if you do get a checkbook, you want to have 2 signers on that checkbook. Again, it's checks and balances. It protects you as individuals, as a treasurer, and it also allows you to make sure that there's a second set of eyes watching what you're doing, writing the checks, and just making sure that everything is legal. I would highly recommend that you document everything. And when I talk about documentation, a couple of things that I did is I created Excel spreadsheets. I had one for contributions and I had one for expenses. And so when you are tracking those types of things, you want to track who it came from, the date that you received it, the check number that was written, the dollar amount. And by doing that, when you have to go complete your campaign finance report, it makes it a lot easier for you to go back and double check to make sure that you have everything that you've received or that you have written checks for chronologically by date. And it makes things much easier when you're completing your campaign finance reports. In addition, I chose not to have a checking account or a bank checkbook. I chose a bank that would write checks for me. In order to do that, I need to write a memo to the bank saying, I would like to request a check made payable to this organization in this dollar amount for this specific purpose. I keep that memo. I attach the either deposit receipt or the check receipt, a copy of the check. Again, it's just a matter of protecting yourself as a treasurer. That way, if anybody wanted to come and look at your records or do some sort of an audit, you have a nice audit trail. So in terms of keeping accurate, detailed records, we talked a little bit about creating those spreadsheets. You also want a spreadsheet for the expenses, and it includes the same sort of thing. The date that you wrote a check, who the check was made payable to, what it was used for, and the dollar amount. Again, it just makes it easier when you are completing the campaign finance reports. I would also highly recommend that you keep up on your record keeping, at least on a weekly basis. You hopefully will be receiving a lot of contributions, and so it just makes things much easier if you do your record keeping on a weekly basis. One thing to also know is that your campaign finance reports are posted on your county elections website. And so your name will be out there in the public, your report will be out there in the public. So you want to be sure that what you're reporting is accurate information, and anyone has access to review those campaign finance reports. So that's very important to know. I want to talk a little bit about the campaign finance periods. So depending on your district's election cycle, there's a number of different campaign finance reports, deadlines throughout the year. So most often those campaign finance report periods are cyclical or within quarters. And so, for example, quarter one might be January 1 through March 31st, and your campaign finance report would be due between April 1st and April 15th. In addition to that, there are often, when it gets closer to the election time, there are what's called pre and post campaign finance reports that are due. So it becomes a little more frequent once you get into around July through November and December, where you have a more frequent reports that are due. So for those school districts who are within Maricopa County, you can log on to the Maricopa County Elections Department website, and there will be all of the forms that you need. There's information on how you can go about getting training. There is a calendar that has all of the reporting quarters and the deadline dates for those reports. So let me just verbally share that website with you. It is recorder.maricopa.gov/elections/candidate campaign info. So if you just Google that, that will take you to the candidate campaign information page where all of this information can be found. For those districts who are not in Maricopa County, I recommend that you check with your county elections department. They should have similar information available on their websites. One thing I would highly recommend is Maricopa County offers training to individuals who are the treasurers and how to complete the campaign finance report. So when you go and you look at this report, you might be overwhelmed because there are many, many, many pages to this report. So please know that you do not have to complete every single page. You are only going to complete the pages that are specific to your political action committee. Most often it will be a contributions page, it will be expenses page, it will be an interest page that you've interest earned on your bank account, a few summary pages. So it's not that daunting, but please know that there is help out there for you when you're completing the campaign finance reports. In addition, when you do complete those reports, there's a couple ways that you can do it. There's through Maricopa County, they have an online format. So you can complete your finance report online, you can submit it online. Or if you are a pencil paper kind of a person, you want to just go and double check and you're maybe an accountant and that's important to you, you can also complete the form hard copy. What's most important to know about this is regardless if you are submitting it hard copy or submitting it online, you need to be sure that you are adhering to the deadline date. If you miss the deadline and if it is not turned in by 5 p.m. on the given date, then you will be assessed a fee. And that fee is a daily fee until your report is submitted. I believe it might be $10 or $20 a day. So if you can imagine, if you took, a couple of weeks, that dollar amount is really going to increase. So you really want to pay attention and make sure that you get those reports submitted on time. For those of you in Maricopa County, if you have more specific questions about your campaign finance reports, there are two great people at the County Elections Department. One of them is Hope Olkeen and the other is Christy Passarelli. They are great people, can certainly provide you information and point you in the right direction. And I think that's what I had in terms of just some key elements for the treasurer and what's involved with completing the reports.
Thank you, Linda. And now on to Taylor. And this is the kind of thing that Taylor and her organization does for bonds and overrides. Yesterday, when I met with Taylor, she was writing postcards for various
I still am.
like handwriting stuff on postcards to send out to voters. And I am amazed sometimes at some of the support that we get, especially from companies like Chase. And I know that there are other companies out there that help as well. So Taylor, talk to us a little bit about how Chase got involved, why you're involved, ways that people can ask, should ask businesses for help, that kind of stuff. So take it away, Taylor.
Yeah. Hi. So the main reason Chase got involved in the first place with bonds and overrides was because we are very heavily involved in K-12 work. So we build a lot of schools, we renovate a lot of schools, primarily in Arizona. So one of our biggest initiatives is to give back more than we get, or to give back to the schools and the communities that we serve and that we work in. So we are lucky enough to be involved in these bonds and overrides and the PACs, and donate money, donate time, donate our services in any way we can. And I think, Donna, I told you this yesterday, is that especially for PACs asking for money or asking for donations, it's really great to look at the businesses in your communities or your surrounding areas, or businesses that serve your school. I always like to say better schools, better communities, better business. So, we have a big stake in these bonds and overrides passing, because that makes the schools better, that makes our business better. It's this nice little circle. So even though there are, school districts that are really far away that may not ever ask us, they might have some businesses or vendors that serve their school that do have invested interest in how they do. And so that's kind of our big spiel on why we donate and why we give our services. And another thing is there's two sides to it. And I think I talked about this yesterday. There's a philanthropy side, and then there's a business side. So we obviously give a lot, and we love to give. So, and I know Dr. Hightower talked about the mariachi band that they have, and I've heard them several times at some conferences, and I love them. It would be so sad if they didn't have that for their school and for their kids. They're just so talented. And so for that override not to pass, and for that program to not be available, would be heartbreaking. That's just awful. So that's the more philanthropic side associated to an override. And there's the bond side. These bonds provide, better, school facilities, safer school facilities. And so and that's where we can come in and help. And that serves our business, but it also serves the school and the community. So it's going back to it, it's just that better school, better community, better business. So that's kind of my spiel on it, but.
I have a question for you, Taylor. So is there an economic argument that you can use that is effective to convince a business to support a bond or an override? And what are the best ways for leaders to show support? Should they offer to write letters? Can they offer to write letters to the editor? Can they hang signs in front of their businesses? What other ways could businesses, well, you were handwriting postcards yesterday, but what other ways can businesses support local bonds and overrides?
Just like that, you can write pro statements. I know we've wrote a few this year, just supporting the bond or supporting an override, being like, we support this because you need so many, pro statements. That's a really simple way. It's easy. You can email it or mail it in. Survey, like volunteering, the postcards. I mean, there was a ton of them. Do that. Or I know we're not doing a lot of walks this year, but we're doing a lot of drive-ups. So people can drive up and grab a sign and grab an ice cream, or drive up and grab some pamphlets, grab some literature. So being there, being a body to help push that is always great. They're always needed. Volunteers are always a nice thing to have. I think the argument to a business or even a homeowner would be there. A school is just like this central hub in a community, and it takes community surrounding that school to really flourish, I feel like. And so with that, you can be like, if the school's failing, if the school is falling apart and they have no great programs to offer, like a mariachi band or whatever the case may be, your value of your home goes down. Like, there's not a good school. Why would anyone come to that area, especially if they have kids? Or, a retiree. Yeah, you don't have any kids in the school, but you're going to live in a lesser quality of an area because your school's failing, and so your home is going down in value. Or a business, like I said before, it's that business is in that community or serves that community like we do. We might not be in Phoenix, but we serve Phoenix, and so we have invested interest in how good those communities and schools, are. And so for business in that local area, they even, I feel, have more invested interest in a bond or override passing, because that school is going to bring families and more business and quality, which I think everyone appreciates. So those are some of my bigger arguments. They might not be for everyone, but in my mind, it makes sense. So.
For you, Taylor. Well, thank you both for your insight into this. And now we're going to move to our final speaker, who is Paul Ulan. He is with Primary Consultants. And while campaigns are not required to have a campaign consultant, it can be helpful. And Paul will talk to us about, the different kinds of campaigns, and why some need very little help and some need a lot of help. So the reason I asked Paul to be a part of this is because through so many years, I don't know how many years you've been doing this, Paul. Seems like a lot.
Almost 30.
Okay. So Paul has a lot of experience in this area, and he is very familiar with the rules governing campaigns. And he also knows about very good election strategies. And so I've asked him here this afternoon to share his expertise in this area. So take it away, Paul.
Well, I have a tough act to follow with everybody that has spoken, and a lot of friends and people that I've worked with. And so it is nice to follow well spoken, and I think everybody's contributed a lot to it. And hats off to Taylor, because yesterday I wish I could have taken the picture of her on the Zoom with the postcard. It was classic. So she gets the big time kudos award for not only helping but doing a lot of the cards. And that was one of the things that we're doing this year a little different. But I think the first issue is why do you hire a consultant, and there are a few of us out there that do a lot of the school elections, and it's no different from, needing a knee surgery and you go to a orthopedic surgeon versus your general practitioner, or you're getting ready to go to court. Do you hire an attorney, or do you do it pro se, try to do it yourself? And there are a number of districts that over the years have built up that knowledge and expertise and that can do it themselves. But it's always nice to have, again, to the degree, somebody that's doing this full time that understands, as I say, the right information to the right voter at the right time. And the key is, and Karen and Cindy went through it in Scottsdale when we did, they realized, especially in a general election, parents and staff are going to represent 10 to 15% max of the ballots cast. So what are you doing with the other 85, with the other 85%? How are you, who are those folks, and how are you getting to, how are you communicating with them? And more importantly, what are you saying? So is it property values? Is it programs? Is it, jobs? Those are the things that are important that a consultant can bring to the table.
And you also have voter information that you can share with
Right,
people
right.
as well.
So part of the, voting is habit forming. So people tend to do it or not do it. So Agua Fria, or Terry Locke spoke earlier. Chandler has a tremendous amount of voter history that we capture after that election. So we know who voted in what I call a special election, meaning an odd year election, versus who voted in a general election, whether it's presidential or gubernatorial. And many of you have heard me, I say my life is odd or even. So is it an odd election where it's special? And we've seen in Maricopa County, especially over the last couple of years, those elections are now all mail elections. So it changes, who's going to come out to vote versus a gubernatorial or presidential election. I think in Maricopa County, we're going to hit over 80% of the people are going to come out to vote. So that challenge is, 80% are going to vote. I don't know if 80% are going to flip the ballot over and vote from the back forward, which is something we've been trying to tell people. If you care about your community, turn it over, vote for your local, your bond, your overrides, your school board, your community college, your sanitation district. And yes, the president and the Senate and the legislature impact you, but those are the elections that impact you on a daily basis. And so understanding who those voters are, age, party, and gender, and then where they live. So Agua Fria, which is where Donna is, has two distinct districts, Litchfield and Avondale. And in a general election, or even a special election, Avondale represents about 18 to 20% of the vote. Litchfield, represents around 80%. Well, you better be spending your resources that way. If you're spending all your time in Avondale, you're neglecting Litchfield and vice versa. So it's just understanding that information and who those voters are.
And that's the benefit that a consultant can bring to you is knowing that information or sharing that information with you. Although, like Paul said, there's some districts that have run elections for so many years, they kind of have this down and can probably, ask for some more limited help from a campaign consultant. Paul, I wanted you also to talk about, why does it seem like schools are asking for money all the time?
Because they are. I'm sorry, that's the wrong answer, right? I think it depends, and I'm sure we have of our listeners, we have some diversity. If you're in an elementary district versus or a high school district versus a unified, that's really what happens. So if you look at, for example, Tolleson Union, and Dr. Hightower was on the call, and proud to call Tolleson Elementary a client. Tolleson Union has gone out for an election since every year since 2016. So that's 5 consecutive years. And voters in Littleton, which feed into Tolleson Union, have had elections 3 out of those 5 years. So you get into this situation where you're going out, the high school goes out in 16 and the elementary district goes out in 17, or you're both going out together. And it's just, it seems like you're going out every year. One of the things, and Terry Locke talked about it, you're doing your overrides on a 4-year cycle. Now, remember, if you pass the override in 16, it's funded for 7 years. Now, remember, your election is in November of 16. You don't get the money till July 1, 2017. So when the legislature changed the rules on those elections, overrides used to be in March and May so you could go out before the budget. Now you're going out after. So districts look at going out in 4 years, which is really 3.5 on a fiscal calendar. It's 4 years from the election. And so you get 2 bites at the apple. Some districts have a history, hey, we go out in year 5 and that's what we do, and that's okay. But you try to get in that position where you're going out a year ahead of time. And again, you have Paradise Valley is a good example. They've gone out just like Chandler every 2 years for the last 10 years. So you're doing an override. You might do a bond and a capital override or district additional assistance. And then 2 years later, you're renewing your override. Then you might be going out for a bond, or you do a capital and a bond. And so you have that mix in there. But unfortunately for the districts, really, cities can go out and raise their tax rate. School districts can't do that. In order to go out for those funds and the override, you need you have to go back out to the voters, and that is the accountability for it. And I will add, I had a client yesterday say, they were presenting to a community organization, and they said, we'd really like this to go away. Why don't we just give you the money? And most people would say that, and I think most people would pay for it, not realizing it's not the district's choice, it's the legislature, and that you're not giving, that base level is not enough to do the things that you want to do, whether it's class sizes, nurses, programs, salaries. I mean, it is a challenge. And so you're forced to go out to your community to support. And most districts, if you want to succeed right now, not only do you need, your override, you need the bond to have a capital improvement program. And then you need that capital override because for the last 6-8 years, they've cut that money. Now it's restored back from a number that is way old, that was, thrown on the wall to say, okay, that works. It doesn't really work when you look at what you're trying to do today, but they're back funding that.
Paul, we have a question here. Are there any landmines that supporters or advocates should avoid when campaigning in support of a bond or an override?
Great question. So first, we want to be careful about taxes and tax rate, that's sort of been my pet peeve through this. Overrides, if you have an override in place and you're renewing at that current rate, I try not to talk about property taxes, because when your house goes up, when your assessed value goes up, you're paying more taxes. All the district can do is control the tax rate for that override, whether it's 10 or 15% or whatever number you have. So you want to make sure you're being consistent with, it's the tax rate, not increasing your tax rate, not your property taxes. That's an important one. And 2, not over, I don't think threats are as beneficial or impactful as they used to be, because districts do a really good job of cutting and making sure that kids aren't impacted. So don't say, if we don't get this, we're going to cut X, Y, and Z, and then lose and not cut X, Y, and Z. Those and so really over promising, what you're going to deliver.
Perfect. Okay, now we're going to ask everybody to come back in real quick. And we have one question that I would love for all of you to chime in on. And that question, now I got to find it, is, let's see. How do you think the public is feeling right now about bonds and overrides in this new era of COVID and pandemic stuff? Paul, let me start with you.
It was mentioned earlier, 2012 was a rough year. Ironically, the bonds did really well, and bonds over the last 20 years have done well. It's the overrides that took a beating. And I lost one by 36, one by 50, and one by 800 votes out of 100,000 cast. So I think even prior to the pandemic, people were feeling really good. I think education is still the top issue. It's tough to ask for more money or even ask for money when kids aren't in school. And the cherry on top of that, of this little ice cream is, there's a multi-million-dollar campaign going out talking about superintendents getting a lot of money and only 55 cents of the dollar going into the classroom, and things aren't being managed right. And so it's a tough environment. There's no question about that. And that's, part of this is you have to talk about, it's all local. This money, the money we have, the money we want, it's local, it's controlled locally, and it's going to be spent locally and in our schools and our classrooms.
Dr. Hightower, do you have anything to add to that?
It is, I don't know what's going to happen, right? But our community has always been so incredibly generous. So we hope that they continue to approve our maintenance and operations override. But we don't know. We don't know, and we can just factually share information with them and see what happens.
Aga, do you have any opinions on this? You're on mute.
I definitely agree that it's more challenging time for campaigning and for reaching out to convince the community, just because there are lots of challenges that involve pandemic. So, but I agree with everything that was said.
Linda?
I'm a little fearful, especially running campaigns during a pandemic. There are many people who have been out of work, working from home for 6 months. Our kids have been in their homes learning, but that thought of people thinking, oh, teachers aren't in the classroom, so they're not teaching. I'm really fearful of what the outcome of elections will be this year. One thing I always like to keep in the forefront of people's minds is that our kids that we are educating today are our future leaders. They are our future business leaders. They're going to be working in our communities. They're going to be working in our local businesses. And so why would we not want to invest in our future leaders? That's the question that I just raised to people that I have conversations with. Is somebody invested in my education? And I'm very grateful because it has afforded me great opportunities in my career. And I want to be able to pass that on to our next generation.
Perfect. And Terry, I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, Linda really said it the best. A new factor this year is similar to what we were experiencing during the recession 11 or 12 years ago. True. Is people having, am I on? Yeah. People that have their light on the pocketbook right now. They've been laid off. They've made less commission, whatever the case might be. That reminds me a lot of 11 or 12 years ago when the country was going into a deep recession. And then again, all the issues related to school opening and school closures have made people feel very strongly one way or another, no matter what the governing boards decided to do on very complex issues. We created enemies, and pretty much every decision we made about closing schools and reopening schools, we pretty much ticked off half of our community. So I'm kind of glad we don't have an election. But I think Linda hit it on the head in terms of the kinds of issues that our communities our parents and our voters are going through.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being a part of Expect More Arizona's very first webinar in part of a series. Our next webinar is scheduled for October 7th at 5 o'clock, and it will be about how your vote impacts early education. I wanted to do this because I want to encourage people who may not have children in school to get involved with their local political action committees to help pass this much needed funding in their school districts. You can write letters to the editor. You can do some of those postcards that Taylor was doing. There's all kinds of ways that you can help. You can write letters to the editor. But I would encourage you, it's a great way to learn about your school district. It's a great way to meet wonderful parents and wonderful school leaders. So thank you again for being with us tonight. And with that, we'll say goodbye. Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Thank
Donna.
you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.